Hi everyone, I wanted to show you a doll that I've made recently for my Halloween series. And the reason I'm doing the Halloween series of dolls in September is because I like to get as much stuff as possible done between the start of September and Halloween. And also it gives people, if they want to recreate this doll look, plenty of time to find resources and make the doll themselves if they want to. I had a doll given to me by J Dolls UK, which was a Laguna doll that was missing an arm. And I looked in my spares and repaints box and found another one. So I decided that it'd be quite cool if I could combine the two dolls together and make a double-headed siren. Now, obviously, you probably think, well, I could have just repainted Perry and Pearl. Perry and Pearl are a very specific sculpt, like with the tail and everything, which was not what I was looking for. And I didn't want to actually get a Perry and Pearl and trash that and then just change the tail and stuff like that. I'd rather start off with two small dolls and make it myself. Now, with Perry and Pearl, they're very big, and I actually found it quite hard to store or display. So I ended up selling my Perry and Pearl, and I wanted to make a two-headed siren that is smaller. So this is what I went for. So I got the two dolls out of my broken and repaint box, and I cut both of them so that I could fit them together to create one two-headed doll. And as you can see, I removed the legs, which was easy enough once the doll had been sawed in half. And I used the holes where the legs used to be to wrap wire around. This was just to stabilise the dolls and to hold them in position while I applied the epoxy sculpt to join them together permanently and also to fill in any holes. I could have used hot glue in the torsos to hold them together, but I decided and epoxy sculpt set's really solid. It's like concrete anyway, but you can sand it and stuff. So I decided what I wanted to do was use my epoxy sculpt to join them together, to fuse them together. And you do have to be careful to make sure you don't move the dolls while the epoxy sculpt's setting, otherwise you can get a bit of cracking, which I did get a little bit of cracking. And then I had to go in and refill the dolls again with a little bit more epoxy sculpt. But it wasn't a problem. It worked out fine. So what I did was I took part A and B of my epoxy sculpt and mixed those together. And I made enough so I could join both dolls together and have plenty of epoxy sculpt to fill in the gaps. So as you can see here, what I'm doing is I'm using the epoxy sculpt. I'm placing it in the centre where the divide is between the two dolls, and then smoothing it down as best as I can to make sure it holds the dolls together and it's all pressed firmly into those gaps to make sure I've basically filled the doll. And also I'm making sure to try and smooth it down as much as I can, because the more I can smooth now, the less I've got to sand the doll later on. I knew I would have to do a fair bit of sanding, but obviously I wanted to limit the amount of time I'd have to spend on that. And if I hadn't have blended the epoxy sculpt as best as I could, I would have been sanding for ages, which I didn't fancy doing. So I worked my way from the bottom all the way to the shoulders, first of all, making sure to apply plenty of epoxy sculpt. Then I worked all the way down the back of the doll, keeping in mind the shape of the anatomy, like the shoulder blades, the shape of the spine in the back or anything like that, because obviously I wanted to make sure I maintained those features to make it look a bit more, not realistic, because obviously it's not going to look particularly realistic. But just to make it look like it was all one doll to start off with, if you get what I mean. So instead of it looking like two dolls that have been sawn in half and stuck together, I wanted it to look like it was one double-headed doll pretty much to start with. So I'm smoothing it as much as I can. And what I'm doing is making sure I filled all the gaps. I don't want any areas left where the doll could possibly crack apart, or where there'd be any gaps or any weird sort of shapes to the doll. I want to make sure it's all fixed together securely and looks okay. So I applied plenty of epoxy sculpt and left that to dry. I think it sets in sort of 12 hours, but I always leave it 24 hours just to make sure it's all fully set before I do anything else. Then the next day I started the sanding process. Now I have got a little sort of, it's not a Dremel, it's like a cheapy one, but it plays up a bit and the sanding thing keeps coming off the top of it, which is annoying. So I decided I wasn't going to battle with that, and because it's quite a small doll, I thought, well, I'll just do it with my nail file. Now this did take me a while, but doing this, I could get in like really small spaces, like that gap between their two necks is really small, and I wouldn't have been able to get there into that gap with my little electric tool thing I've got. So a nail file was perfect for this. And I took the time to sand the doll as best as I could, trying to sort of keep to the shape of the doll so that I didn't like sort of flatten out every single feature of the doll. And I wanted it to make it look like her tummy was a flat tummy, and you know, I just worked on sanding it and getting it all nice and smooth, because basically I wanted the transition from the epoxy sculpt to the plastic to blend in as best as possible. So it did take a bit of work. I think I was sanding this doll for probably about 20 minutes. Obviously I've sped it up on here and cut bits out, but in the end I was quite happy with how it came out. I knew the torso wasn't going to look perfect, but I knew that the design I had in mind for how I wanted to do the outfit for the doll would cover this, so I wasn't too concerned. And I knew from like sort of where the belly button used to be down, it'll all be tail anyway, so I wasn't too worried if it wasn't perfect. But obviously I got it as smooth as I could, and basically just blended in all those seam lines just to get rid of the seams and not the lines, the edges of the epoxy sculpt, just to blend them in with the plastic. And then once I was finished with the sanding, then I was working out how I was going to do the tail. And I decided to have a bit of wire in the base of the tail just for the initial part when I make the tail, because it meant I could shape it a bit. Now originally I was going to wrap the wire around the base of the doll like this, but you'll see I'll take this all off in a bit and realise that was a daft idea, and I just stick with my first idea. And the wire I've got is quite thin. It's like a jewellery wire I've got. It's just something I picked up cheap, which I could have done with it being a bit thicker, but never mind. So as you can see, in the end I went through the leg holes again. I've got about folded the wire up in half so it was a bit thicker, and then added another piece, so it was like 4 sort of lengths of wire in the end twisted together, which was fairly sturdy. Surprisingly, it was enough for what I wanted, because basically what I wanted this wire to do was, once I've bent the tail into the position I wanted this wire to hold the tail in that position while I wrapped all the stuff around it to bulk it up, and when I applied the all the stuff on the outside to finish it off. So yeah, this just gave it a bit of stability and just held the tail in the shape I wanted while I finished the doll off. And as you can see, I twisted the 4 lengths of wire around as much as I could, just to give me that bit of strength. Then I'd got an idea I was going to wrap string around like I did for another doll, then realised that wasn't going to work. So in the end, I went with masking tape. Masking tape's brilliant for bulking up the doll. It sticks to the doll, it sticks to the wire, And it enabled me to build up the bulk of the tail without having to waste like loads of clay or loads of hot glue, anything like that. And because it's masking tape, it's flexible enough for me to bend into shape. So once I'd applied quite a few layers of masking tape, just basically kept wrapping it around and around and around and around and around and pressing it in place. With the help of the wire that I'd got inside, I bent the tail to the shape I wanted to create, which was sort of half sitting, kind of bent tail look. Then I had to think, well, how am I going to create the texture on the tail? And I thought, well, I'll go with what I did before. If you remember, I'll put a link in the description. I made a previous Siren doll last year, which was called Siren. And the way I had did the sort of bumpy, scaly, bubbly effect on her tail was I used hot glue. And I decided I really like that look. I really like the texture it creates, and I like how it looks and how secure it feels and how sturdy it feels afterwards. So I decided to do the same thing. And what you do is you get your hot glue gun quite hot, so you have to leave it on for a bit to make sure it's properly warmed up. And then you squeeze out the tiniest little blob of glue, like it's just like a glue dot. And then you twirl the glue gun around and around in little circles because you get those little strands that come off, don't you? So you twirl it around a couple of times, and those little strands off the end of the gun stick to the blob of glue that's on the doll. And then because it's still hot, it all just oozes down into like this little smooth dome shape. So I use that to create the top around the doll, some bubbles down the centre of the doll, and then to coat the entire tail. To make the fins, what I did was I drew these sort of spine shapes onto a plastic food bag that I'd got in my kitchen, and with the main part of the tail at the end, I basically drew rib shapes. I was inspired by the shape of like ribs and bones because I wanted it to look like quite creepy. So I drew these like rib shapes onto the plastic, and then I let the glue cool down and then cut out the food bag around the hot glue. So that's what gives you this translucent sort of almost web-like or rib-like spiny fins for the doll. And then I stuck those onto the doll with some more hot glue. So that was like the main bulk of the doll done and in position. This is me discovering I just dipped the doll in white paint. I had to get it all off. Then it came to the painting. Now, first of all, I was going to keep the original skin tone and just paint the faces, like paint the eyes, the mouth, and details like that. But you'll see I do change my mind partway through. I hadn't 100% decided. I knew the colour palette I wanted to use for the doll, but I hadn't quite decided how I was going to do it. So first of all, I was going to keep the original skin tone and then maybe put a wash of colour over afterwards to get the colour I wanted. But I did change my plan in the end. So first of all, I painted the eyes. There's also a couple of those sort of dots of glue on their heads for decoration as well, in case you're wondering what those little dots are on the head. You could do that with flat back gems or something, but I decided to do it all with a hot glue. It's cheap and easy enough to do because I've got plenty of hot glue. So yeah, I worked on painting the eyes. Now obviously the trick with doing a two-headed doll, because obviously it's a two-headed doll, it's the same creature, it's the same body, so you've got to do the faces identical. That's the hard part, because obviously if I did two different faces it might look a bit strange, although I might do that for another doll because that might look kind of cool. I don't know, I'll have a think. So I just thought then of like another two-headed creature or something that I could create. I'm like, ooh, maybe I could make it look like it was like, I don't know, Frankenstein with something else sewn on or something. Ooh, I've got ideas. Anyway, so yeah, I painted the eyes black. Then I realised I hadn't removed the lips because I wanted to create quite a big open mouth toothy grin on these sirens, and the lips are very sort of small and pouty on the Laguna dolls. because she has got basically like fish lips. And obviously what I need is a flat surface so I can paint the new shape of the mouth on. So I used my craft knife just to take the lips down so it was like nice and flat, and then just a bit more sanding just to make sure the face was flat. And then that allowed me to paint the new mouth on. I could have sculpted the mouth if I wanted with epoxy sculpt to add like the lips and stuff, but I knew that painting it would work for what I wanted for this particular doll. So as you can see, I sanded it down. I did have to repaint the eyes obviously afterwards. Now what I did was I got a bit of blue and mixed a bit of black with it to create this sort of bluey grey black colour. I painted the entire doll with a wash of this colour and then used baby wipes to wipe off the excess paint. So it's like it's an antiquing effect. So as you can see, what you do is you paint the colour on that you want as like the base colour of the doll, like I've done on that arm that I'm not touching. Give it a few seconds just to start drying, because if you do it too soon, it just wipes all the paint off. And then take a baby wipe that's not mega wet and just pat the doll. As you can see, if you wipe off too much, you just put more paint on and then just touch it up later. But you just pat the doll and it takes off the paint in like the raised areas. So it gives you this lovely blue wash, this blue-grey wash. Obviously, it went in all the little crevices and stuff between the bubbles that are on her tail and everything. So it adds depth to the doll as well. So I do like doing this technique. It's like when I did... there's some other dolls I've done, like a statue one and stuff, where I've used the same technique. And as you can see, I decided to do the same on the fins, because the fins looked a bit weird being like a bright white and clear colour compared to the rest of the doll. So you just take your bluey black paint it on the fins or on the doll, like I'm doing here on the tail. And this is the exact same technique I did on the entire body. And I decided to cut out the video I'd filmed of me doing the body because it takes forever and this video is long enough as it is. So all I did for the entire body is exactly what I did for this tail piece, which is where I paint the paint all over, just not a too thick layer, but, you know, not very watered down. It's quite a thick layer of paint. Apply it all over and then use a baby wipe to wipe off the excess. And basically you just use, like, if the paint's freshly put on, you just use very light dabbing motions with the baby wipe to get off the paint off the very surface, like I'm doing here. If you've left the paint on a second longer, say you've painted the entire doll and then you turn it back over and go to wipe off the front will be fairly dry and you have to rub a bit more with a fresh baby wipe. But I found that this did the trick. Then, as you can see, I'd painted the shape of the mouth before, so I knew what shape I wanted to do in the bluey colour. So then it was a case of going over those mouth shapes in black, because I want the inside of the mouth to look really dark, like really inky and black and horrible, basically, is what I wanted the mouth to look. And then I used white paint to paint the teeth on. And then what I found is if you do, say, about 4 or 5 layers of white paint over the teeth, you can actually get them so they're like a little bit 3D, so it almost looks like you've sculpted them instead of them being like flat painted on. So it makes them look a bit more like I've stuck teeth on as opposed to just painted them on. So I do quite like that effect. So I went over the teeth several times. Every so often I touched up the black around the teeth. I wanted really needle sharp teeth in their mouths. Like, you know, these are creatures that are used to eating shellfish, and maybe they eat turtles and stuff. You know, they eat stuff that's like not easy to bite through, and because they're at the bottom of the ocean, so they get whatever they can find, sort of thing. Then I rerouted the dolls with this mixture of a blue and purple Connectlon hair that I got off Amazon. And I liked how it matched with the outfit, because I wanted it to be the dolls like a bluey grey theme. There's a bit more blue in there than the grey, which is what I wanted. And as you can see, I repainted the eyes, and then I used a lighter version of the paint that I used for the skin tone around the eyes, just to make the edges of the eyes stand out, so it looks almost like they've got little eyelids. And the reason I did solid black eyes is because I imagine that they live in like the depths of the ocean where there's not a lot of light, so their eyes are big and black and open, so that they can get as much light in as possible, so they can see their prey deep down. So yeah, this is my two-headed siren doll that I created for Halloween. Hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.